Welcome to Logical, the first regular podcast navigating the latest legal updates shaping the United Arab Emirates. I'm Tim Elliott, and as always, I'm with Ludmila Yamalova. Ludmila is the managing partner of Yamalova and Pleska here in Dubai. Nice to see you.
Great to see you too, and great to be chatting with you, Tim, as always.
I want to start with some background stuff, Ludmila. We're going to be talking corporate tax registration today. It has been extended. It's big news. I know that. But first of all, just give us a background to corporate tax. It's new for lots of people, of course. And also then a little bit about the initial deadlines for registration.
Yeah, and corporate tax is a bit of a scary phrase in the UAE.
Frightening.
Yeah, especially for the likes of you and I who've been in this country for so long. And until 2018, tax was not part of our vocabulary. And until the VAT tax was introduced, that was our first introduction, like soft landing.
You keep using the T word.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, it's kind of like almost like a curse word. But since then, and I guess it was kind of predicted that the UAE's tax framework will continue to evolve and continue to extend and grow. Mm-hmm. And so it has been. So the first was the VAT in relevant terms, and then or the VAT tax, and then in 2022 the UAE issued the big announcement about the corporate tax law coming in. Yes. And so that was the Federal Decree Law number 47 of 2022 on the taxation of corporations and businesses. And the law itself, while it was issued in 2022, would come into effect for the purposes of reporting and compliance on March 1 of 2024, which is this year. So the introduction of that law in particular marked obviously a significant shift in the UAE's taxation framework, transitioning from a tax-free environment to one that includes corporate taxation for businesses and value-added taxation and many more perhaps to come in the future. And so the main objectives are for this law, introduction of this law and the tax framework in general, is to diversify the UAE's revenue sources and align with international tax standards.
Exactly right. Let's go through, or can we go point by point and summarize the most, the most relevant aspects of the UAE's corporate tax law?
Yes, definitely. So one is, as the definition makes it clear, it's the tax that applies on corporations and businesses. So that's why it's called a corporate tax. And the law came into effect on March 1st of 2024, and then the law itself, that is, not the text of the law, but the law. Mm-hmm. And the tax rate, as per the corporate tax law, is 9%, and applies to all taxable income that exceeds 375,000 dirhams. So that's the threshold. It's about $100,000. And then income up to 375,000 dirhams or $100,000 is taxed at 0%. And therefore, that's kind of a way for the UAE to support the small businesses and startups. Now, the tax applies to corporations and businesses operating within the UAE, including those that are in the free zone. If they conduct business with the mainland, ultimately. So there are a few exemptions. In relevant terms, and certain businesses are exempt from corporate tax, such as those businesses that engage in natural resource extraction, and that will remain subject to emirate-level taxation. And then certain government entities, charitable organizations, investment funds, public benefit organizations, and they also are subject to some exemptions. And so there's a whole series of exemptions, but the law, as was predicted, and as we have seen, is kind of like an onion, right? It just is more and more layers to it and continues to grow. And so there is more exemptions that continue to be rolled out every so often. And there are different clarifications, announcements, additions to the law. So in terms of the exemptions, that's a space that needs to continue to be watched because the exemptions are continuing to be added and amended as we go through the process. Now, in terms of calculation of taxable income, it will be based on the accounting net profit reported in financial statements, adjusted for any exceptions as is specified in the law. And there's certain free zone businesses that could be called as qualifying free zone businesses that adhere to the regulatory requirements that basically are subject to the 0% tax rate. So there are some exceptions for free zones, but they're quite nuanced, they're very specific. So for the most part, they're almost negligible. And there's some transfer pricing and documentation that is addressed in the law, such as companies must comply with transfer pricing regulations and maintain relevant documentation in line with the OECD guidelines. There is some more specific and kind of technical terms like loss utilization. So the law kind of provides for that. But there's one interesting thing is that there's no withholding of taxes. There's no withholding tax on like dividends, interest, and royalties paid to non-residents, which is an interesting nuance. And in terms of the compliance requirements, businesses must register for corporate tax, and all businesses must register for corporate tax and all businesses must file annual tax return, but only certain businesses that qualify actually have to pay the tax, and that's all done through the Federal Tax Authority or the FTA. So this is sort of these are the main aspects create this sort of very comprehensive framework and that supports the UAE's tax system to continue to be competitive in the world stage.
It's a huge thing to introduce, I guess. How have the deadlines for corporate tax registration evolved since, I think that's probably the best way to put it. How have they evolved?
Yes, and that's a good way to put it. And as I mentioned, so the law itself was introduced in 2022. So I guess, but the effectiveness of the law, when it would come actually into effect, and the businesses would have to start complying with it, was right at the outset was kind of built into the future.
Sure, and it depends on tax years, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. There's also that too, and we've covered this on our podcast before. So the law was introduced in 2022. It was supposed to come into effect on March 1st of 2024, and that was kind of what was in the law. And as I said, the onion continues to layer on, and so as part of that, in mid 2024, and then the FTA provided additional clarifications and adjusted the deadline to help businesses basically become compliant, because it's not easy for the UAE businesses to become compliant. And so the new deadline for businesses to actually start becoming compliant, which means registering with FTA and getting their books in order to start. Ultimately, they will not have to yet file the tax returns, but soon the time is coming. So the deadline has been moved from March to November 30th, which is just in a few weeks from now. And that was done by virtue of the FTA's decision, which was number 3, 2024, extending the deadline for businesses with licenses and issued in October and November to November 30th, 2024, giving them more time to become compliant. And that's also an example of how the UAE and FTA have continued to grow this particular legislative practice. And that is, there was an initial law that was introduced, and then there's few amendments, decrees, circulars, and this is one example where the FTA issued a decision that kind of layers on to the foundation, and so the foundation continues to grow and grow. But this is, so we'll see if this will be November 30th will be the last day, or there'll be another announcement. But because this particular announcement was done by virtue of an actual decision and not just an announcement, so I'd imagine if there was a further extension of a deadline, there would be another decision that ultimately will set a new deadline.
I mean, I imagine, and I don't know, and I've registered and was guided backwards and forwards, but it was reasonably efficient, but it took time. I mean, that's simply because of, I guess, backlog of businesses applying. Let's talk a little bit more about the November deadline and who specifically it affects.
Yeah, so it affects specifically businesses with licenses that are issued in October and November. But the FTA has stressed as part of this extension the importance of meeting this deadline and failure to do so will result in fairly significant administrative penalties, as is also outlined in yet another cabinet decision or another regulatory authority, which is the cabinet decision number 75 of 2023. So that's kind of where a lot of the penalties are outlined. So as the FTA makes these announcements about extensions, it also reminds businesses of the other laws that are already in place that, okay, well, we're giving you this grace period to breathe a little longer, but eventually you will have to become compliant, and so be mindful because the penalties are serious, and the penalty are outlined in the law that has been in existence for a few years now. It's from 2023. So that's kind of a way of like, here, we're giving you extra time, but in the same context, remember, if you don't comply with this is serious. So we are being nice, right. But remember that this is our niceness will only go so far because there's serious repercussions for failing to register ultimately with this new deadline. Yeah,
well, we're recording in November. It's coming up to mid-November, so it really is only 2 weeks away. How do you register? What steps are involved?
Well, it's somewhat technical and perhaps not so. And obviously, the UAE's digital transformation, embracing digital transformation, has made things a lot easier. Businesses don't need to go physically anywhere and line up and stay in line for hours and then to submit documents. It's very efficient in that sense. It's all done digitally. So furthermore, there's apps and systems and platforms that are created to make it even more accessible and user-friendly for businesses to pay. So there's a specific platform called Emirat Tax Digital Platform, and that operates 24/7. And so basically that's how much of what you do with taxes is done through this platform. And there is a website that's very self-explanatory and very user-friendly, and it's in English as well as in Arabic, so it's kind of easy to navigate. And that's the eservices.tax.gov.ae. And so businesses that are registered for VAT, and this is kind of an important and perhaps where the soft landing introduction comes into effect, is those businesses who were registered for VAT, like our business, for example, we would already have an account with FTA. Yes. So, or those businesses who were subject to excise tax as well. So they would have an account with FTA, so it's a little easier. And that was kind of going back to our earlier discussion, is that was the UAE's way to help businesses ease in to what was coming next. Is just started with a VAT, and as part of that, we all businesses, and we in particular, had to set up an FTA account and submit documents, start pay VAT since 2018. So we've been paying. So kind of the road has been paved already. So this is just a layer on to that. So for all those businesses who have been registered with VAT, by the way, which should have included a lot of business, majority of the businesses in the UAE. So they would already have kind of the road paved, and that's just another type of tax that they would have to activate.
It's just accounting procedure, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. Yes. So, but then those businesses who have not done so, they will have to go through FTA, register, and obtain what's called the TRN number, which is the tax registration number for corporate tax. So it's it can be done directly by businesses. Or it can be done through authorized tax agents or government services. So there are different options, but certainly you don't need to go through any kind of third parties. The website and the services are designed such a way as to make it accessible for businesses themselves. And in fact, I encourage that all businesses have their own direct portal to FTA, and even if they had the initial setup done by somebody else, by like a third party, they should still have their own login and their own direct access to the FTA portal.
I just think if I can navigate it, there are frustrations with everything because you have to know which boxes to tick, and as it always is. But I think if I can do it, then pretty much anybody can do it. That's my take. What do businesses need to be aware of in terms of registration, specifically registration criteria, and then also what do businesses need to know about penalties?
Well, businesses should keep in mind that the registration timeline is determined by their earliest license issuance date.
Okay.
Even if some licenses are expired, they're still subject.
Okay.
And also that failure to meet the registration deadline will result in significant penalties as per Cabinet Resolution or Cabinet Decision number 75 of 2023. The penalties are well set out there, so easy to read. And it's also obviously essential to adhere to the specified timelines to avoid these penalties and more.
Okay, so if you're a business, how do you make sure that you stay compliant and avoid paying penalties?
Well, as is the case everywhere else, it's fairly logical. I mean, one is just kind of you need to review the corporate tax law. You need to know what it's all about. It ain't simple.
No.
But certainly the UAE has tried to make it more accessible for businesses. So there's a website, the law, and all the different explanations, clarifications, and charts and diagrams are available on its website, which is tax.gov.ae. And it's a pretty helpful website. I'm not sure if you've poked around, but there's a lot of at least diagrams that attempt to explain certain concepts that are a little more complex, visually explained. So that's quite helpful. One is knowing the law. Two is just double checking, cross checking the timelines and the deadlines that apply to them. And then also need to make sure that they use the right tools to apply and pay, to register, to obtain their certificates, and to ultimately pay. That they don't rely on third parties and kind of delegate to them blindly. They need to make sure that, because ultimately they will be the ones responsible for making all the payments. So it's not an excuse that one of your agents or one of your service providers did not file timely. And most importantly, you have to plan ahead because it will change. And for many businesses, it has already changed transformatively the way we do business in the UAE.
That's another logical. The T word, corporate tax in this instance, really, really important episode, I think. If you own a company here in the UAE, breaking down the corporate tax landscape and the extension to corporate tax registration. Thank you for listening and watching. If you're with us on YouTube, and thanks as always to our legal expert, Ludmila Yamalova, who is the managing partner of Yamalova and Plethkov. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Find us across social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you get your updates and wherever you find your podcasts, we're there as well. The website is lylawyers.com. Loads of information there. And if you'd like a legal question answered either by a qualified UAE experienced legal professional or maybe in our next logical, head to lylawyers.com.